At our class reunion, my ex's alpha cousin couldn't stop looking at me. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into today's emotional story, we'd love to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy heartfelt, dramatic BL stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. It only takes a second, it's completely free, and your support helps us continue bringing you more unforgettable stories every week. Thank you so much for being here. Now, before the story begins, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always love seeing how far our stories travel and meeting viewers from different countries and time zones. Now, get comfortable, and let's begin today's story. The people who once looked right through you are often the most shocked when someone truly sees your worth. That was the thought echoing in my mind as I stood outside the Grand Harbor Hotel, staring at the giant blue banner that read, Riverside High School, 10-year reunion. 10 years. Somehow, an entire decade had slipped away since I walked out of those hallways carrying nothing except a broken heart, a damaged reputation, and a silent promise that I would never let anyone decide my value again. I almost turned around before stepping inside. The parking lot was already packed with polished SUVs and luxury sedans, their gleaming paint reflecting the warm summer sunset. Laughter drifted through the open entrance as old classmates reunited with effortless smiles, exchanging hugs and stories about careers, marriages, and families. Everyone seemed to belong there except me. I adjusted the sleeves of my navy blazer, reminding myself that I wasn't the frightened 19-year-old Omega who had once believed love alone could survive rumors, pride, and public embarrassment. My name is Noah Hayes, and rebuilding my life had taken every ounce of strength I possessed. After graduation, I left Riverside without looking back. I worked countless late nights, earned my degree, started my own interior design studio in Seattle, and slowly discovered that success felt far quieter than revenge. I never returned for alumni events, birthday gatherings, or holiday parties. But this year, an old teacher personally invited me, saying it was finally time to let the past become just that, the past. I wanted to believe him. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, with soft jazz floating through the air and elegant centerpieces decorating every table. Familiar faces blended with strangers, older yet recognizable, carrying traces of the teenagers they used to be. Some greeted me warmly, surprised but genuinely happy to see me. Others looked away after recognizing my face, as if uncomfortable memories had quietly resurfaced. Then I heard a laugh I could never mistake. Logan Hayes, my former boyfriend, my former best friend, the man who had once convinced me that forever was real before choosing pride over trust when it mattered most. He looked almost exactly the same. Confident smile, tailored charcoal suit, effortless charm, but standing beside him was someone I had never expected to meet. He was taller than everyone around him, broad-shouldered, calm, and impossible to ignore. His black suit fit with understated elegance rather than extravagance, and every conversation near him seemed to soften as though people instinctively respected his presence. His name, I would soon learn again, was Damian Carter, Logan's alpha cousin. The moment his steel blue eyes found mine across the ballroom, the noise around me seemed to fade into distant echoes. He didn't glance at me the way strangers usually do. He studied me with quiet recognition, almost as though he had been searching for someone he had already memorized years ago. I looked away first, convinced it was coincidence, yet every time I found myself speaking with another classmate or reaching for another glass of sparkling cider, I could feel the unmistakable weight of his gaze returning. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't flirting. He simply couldn't stop looking at me, and somehow that silent attention unsettled me far more than seeing my ex ever could. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it. Maybe Damian Carter simply had one of those thoughtful expressions that made everyone believe they were the center of his attention. It was the only explanation that made sense. After all, why would the cousin of the man who had once shattered my trust remember someone like me? I drifted toward the refreshment table, grateful for the excuse to put more distance between us. A server offered me a glass of sparkling cider, and I accepted it with a quiet smile before wandering toward a display of old yearbooks arranged beside a wall covered in photographs from our senior year. Faces that had once felt larger than life now looked almost unfamiliar. There I was, standing in the back row of the debate club picture, smiling with a confidence I had long forgotten. Logan stood beside me with one arm resting casually across my shoulder, both of us convinced the future would unfold exactly as we imagined. Funny how a single decision could erase an entire version of your life. Noah. I turned at the sound of my name and found Melissa Grant, one of my old classmates, smiling warmly. She hugged me without hesitation. I cannot believe you actually came. I laughed softly. Neither can I. We spent several minutes catching up, talking about careers, favorite cities, and how strange it felt to realize we were all in our late 20s now. It was comfortable, almost healing, until her expression became hesitant. I always wanted to tell you something, she admitted quietly. Back then, a lot of us knew something was wrong. We just did not know how to stand up against the rumors. I looked at her for a moment before offering a gentle smile. You do not have to apologize for something you did not create. Her shoulders relaxed as though she had been carrying that sentence for 10 years. Before either of us could continue, another familiar voice interrupted. Noah. Logan stood only a few feet away, hands tucked neatly into his pockets. Time had softened the sharp edges of his face, but not the uncertainty in his eyes. You look different, he said. Older, I answered with a faint grin. Hopefully wiser too. He gave a nervous laugh. I have wanted to talk to you for a long time. 10 years is a long time to prepare a conversation, I replied calmly. Before he could answer, another presence joined us. Damen stepped beside his cousin with quiet confidence, carrying himself with the kind of effortless authority that never demanded attention because it naturally earned it. Up close, his blue eyes were even more striking, steady without being intimidating. Noah Hayes, he said, extending his hand. It is good to finally meet you. Finally, that single word lingered in my mind. I accepted the handshake, surprised by the sincerity in his expression. Have we met before? I asked. Damen held my gaze for a brief second before answering. Not officially. Logan shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly surprised by the exchange. Damen continued in an even voice. I have heard your name for many years. Silence settled between the three of us. Logan looked from Damen to me as though trying to understand a conversation that had started long before he arrived. I should have walked away. Every instinct told me to leave the past exactly where it belonged. Yet something about Damien's calm honesty made that impossible. For the first time since walking into the reunion, I realized he was not looking at me because he recognized the person everyone used to talk about. He was looking at me because he already knew a story that I had never been given the chance to tell. Damien's words lingered in my mind long after the conversation dissolved into polite smiles and casual greetings from passing classmates. I have heard your name for many years. It was such a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of something unfinished. Before I could ask another question, one of the reunion organizers stepped onto the small stage near the ballroom windows and invited everyone to gather for the welcome presentation. The lights dimmed slightly as old photographs flashed across a large screen, filling the room with laughter whenever an awkward hairstyle or embarrassing school memory appeared. I slipped into an empty seat near the back, hoping the darkness would make me invisible again. Instead, someone quietly occupied the chair beside me. I did not have to turn my head to know who it was. Damien's calm presence seemed impossible to ignore without demanding attention. Unlike the other alphas I had known years ago, there was no overwhelming confidence, no desire to dominate every conversation. He simply sat there, listening to the stories on stage while occasionally smiling at memories only he seemed to understand. After several minutes, he leaned over just enough to speak without disturbing anyone else. Your design studio in Seattle has received several regional awards. I blinked in surprise. You know about my business? Yes. How? He looked toward the screen rather than at me. I follow architecture and interior design projects for work. Your firm's renovation of the Evergreen Children's Library received national recognition last year. For a moment, I forgot how to respond. That project had been the proudest achievement of my career, but outside the design industry, almost nobody recognized it. I did not expect anyone here to know that, I admitted. Damen smiled faintly. People notice more than they admit. The presentation ended with applause before groups scattered throughout the ballroom once again. This time Damen remained beside me instead of returning to Logan. We slowly walked toward a quieter terrace overlooking the marina where warm evening air replaced the noise inside. Sailboats rocked gently across the water while strings of lights reflected against the harbor like scattered stars. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why were you looking at me all evening?" Damien rested his hands lightly against the railing before answering. "Because I wanted to make sure I recognized the same person." I frowned slightly. "Recognized me from what?" He exhaled slowly, as though choosing every word with care. 10 years ago, I attended your graduation." My heart skipped. "You were there?" He nodded. "Logan invited several family members. I arrived late and stayed only a short time." I searched my memory, but found nothing. Graduation day had become little more than a blur after everything that followed. Damien continued quietly. "You probably never noticed me." "I noticed you." I met his eyes, confused by the certainty in his voice. "You looked genuinely happy that morning," he said. "By the end of that week, everyone in my family was talking about rumors, accusations, and a relationship that suddenly ended. I never believed everything I heard." A silence settled between us that felt strangely peaceful rather than uncomfortable. For 10 years I had assumed my story had been forgotten by everyone except me. Yet standing beside the harbor with the evening breeze moving gently across the water, I realized someone had remembered not the gossip, not the whispers, but the person I had been before my life changed. Somehow that quiet truth carried more comfort than any apology ever could. Damien remained quietly beside me as the lights from the marina shimmered across the water, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. It was strange how comfortable that silence felt. 10 years earlier, I had believed every meaningful conversation required perfect words. Age had taught me that the people worth trusting often spoke with patience instead of urgency. "There is something I should have told you years ago," Damien finally said. His voice was calm, but I noticed the faint hesitation behind it. I almost did. I turned toward him. "What stopped you?" He looked across the harbor before answering. "Family." The single word carried more weight than an entire explanation. "When everything happened between you and Logan, I was 24. I had just joined my father's investment firm and was trying to prove myself. Logan was like a younger brother to me. Everyone believed his version of events because it was easier than asking difficult questions." I folded my arms lightly against the evening breeze. "Did you believe him?" Damien met my eyes without hesitation. "No." That answer surprised me more than I expected. He continued before I could respond. "I met you only once, even if you never noticed me. It was graduation day. You stayed behind after the ceremony, helping one of your teachers carry decorations back inside the auditorium while everyone else celebrated outside. Nobody asked you to help. You simply did." I searched my memory until the moment slowly returned. Mrs. Donnelly had twisted her ankle while cleaning up after the ceremony. I had stayed because she could barely carry the boxes alone. I had never imagined anyone watching. Damien smiled faintly. People reveal who they are through small choices. That moment stayed with me. He paused before continuing. A few days later, the rumors spread. I listened to conversations at family dinners, business events, and holiday gatherings. Every story painted you as someone completely different from the person I had seen. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from the quiet sadness of remembering how quickly assumptions had become accepted as truth. "You could have said something," I whispered. Damien nodded slowly. "I know. I have replayed that decision more times than I can count." He rested his hands against the railing again, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "I convinced myself it was not my place. I told myself the situation would resolve on its own. Instead, you disappeared from everyone's life." The honesty in his voice left no room for excuses. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was accepting responsibility for silence. "That is a difficult thing to admit," I said. "It is easier now than it was 10 years ago," he replied. "Leadership teaches you something important. Looking away from the truth may protect comfort for a day, but it always costs someone else much more." His words settled deeply inside me because they echoed a lesson I had learned while rebuilding my own life. We stood there watching a sailboat drift slowly across the harbor until the ballroom doors opened behind us. Music and laughter floated onto the terrace as more classmates stepped outside. Among them was Logan. He spotted us immediately, and although he tried to hide his surprise, it was impossible to miss the way his expression changed when he saw Damien and me standing together in quiet conversation. For the first time that evening, I realized the story everyone believed 10 years ago was no longer the only story waiting to be told. Logan walked toward us with measured steps, offering the same confident smile that had once convinced everyone he belonged in every room he entered. "There you are," he said, looking first at Damien before turning to me. "I have been looking everywhere for both of you." Damien remained composed beside me, neither moving closer nor farther away. "We were talking," he answered simply. Logan forced a light laugh, but the tension behind it was impossible to miss. "I can see that. It is just unexpected." He glanced at me for a moment before continuing. "Noah, could we speak privately?" 10 years ago, I would have agreed immediately, believing every difficult conversation deserved another chance. Now I understood that protecting my peace was not the same as avoiding the truth. "Whatever you want to say can be said here," I replied calmly. Logan hesitated. "Some things are personal." Damien spoke before I could answer. "Then perhaps they should have been handled personally 10 years ago." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed with undeniable weight. Logan stared at his cousin in disbelief. "Whose side are you on?" Damien did not raise his voice. "This is not about sides. It is about honesty." Logan folded his arms, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You barely know what happened." "I know enough," Damien answered. "And I know that silence helped create the version of events everyone accepted without asking questions." I watched the exchange without interrupting. There was no anger between them, only two different ideas of responsibility standing face to face. Logan finally looked at me again. "I never wanted your life to turn out the way it did." His words sounded sincere, but sincerity alone could not erase history. "Intentions matter," I said quietly, "but so do choices." He lowered his eyes for a brief moment. "I was young." "So was I," I replied. "The difference is that we both had the same number of years to grow afterward." A group of classmates stepped onto the terrace, causing the conversation to pause. Several recognized us and waved, unaware of the quiet tension hanging in the evening air. One of them announced that the reunion committee had prepared a memory circle inside the ballroom, where anyone could share a meaningful story from their school years. As everyone slowly returned indoors, Logan remained unusually quiet. Damien waited until the others had walked ahead before speaking again. "Leadership is not measured by how well we defend people we care about. It is measured by whether we are willing to tell them when they are wrong." Logan looked at his cousin with visible surprise. "You really believe I was wrong?" Damien answered without hesitation. "I believe you accepted a version of the truth that was convenient, and you allowed someone else's reputation to carry the cost." Logan opened his mouth as though searching for a response, but found none. For the first time since seeing him that evening, I noticed uncertainty replacing confidence. We entered the ballroom together, yet everything felt different now. The room had not changed, the music had not changed, and the reunion continued as planned, but the invisible balance that had existed for a decade had quietly shifted. No one had raised their voice. No dramatic confrontation had unfolded. Instead, something far more powerful had happened. Someone who shared Logan's own family name had chosen integrity over comfort, and in doing so reminded me that true strength was never about winning an argument. It was about having the courage to stand beside the truth, even when doing so came at a personal cost. The memory circle began with easy laughter. One by one, classmates walked onto the small stage to share stories about unforgettable teachers, championship games, awkward school dances, and dreams they once believed would never come true. The room felt lighter than it had all evening, and for a while I simply listened, grateful that life had given all of us the chance to become more than the teenagers frozen in those old photographs. When the microphone reached my table, I instinctively declined with a polite smile. I had not come to relive the past. I had come to prove to myself that it no longer controlled me. The host nodded with understanding and moved toward another table, but before she could continue, Damien quietly stood. Several conversations immediately softened. There was something naturally commanding about him that never relied on volume. He accepted the microphone with calm confidence, thanked the reunion committee for organizing the evening, and looked around the ballroom before speaking. 10 years is enough time for careers to change, cities to change, and even personalities to change, he began. But sometimes the hardest thing to change is the story we tell ourselves about another person. The room grew noticeably quieter. Nobody interrupted him. I have spent my career evaluating people before making important decisions. One lesson has remained true every single time. Character is rarely revealed through rumors. It is revealed through consistent actions over many years. His eyes briefly met mine before returning to the audience. Tonight, I had the opportunity to reconnect with someone whose accomplishments speak far louder than the assumptions that once surrounded his name. I hope every one of us remembers that none of us should be permanently defined by our worst day or by someone else's opinion. He returned the microphone without mentioning me directly, yet everyone understood. There was no accusation in his words. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Only a quiet invitation to think differently. As the applause filled the ballroom, I felt dozens of curious glances drift toward me, but they no longer carried the judgment I remembered from years ago. They carried questions instead. After the program ended, several former classmates approached me one after another. Some apologized for never reaching out after graduation. Others admitted they had believed stories they had never bothered to verify. I accepted every apology with genuine gratitude, not because I had been waiting for them, but because forgiveness had become easier once I stopped expecting the past to rewrite itself. Damien never interrupted those conversations. He remained several steps away, speaking with other guests, allowing me the space to answer every question in my own words. It was a small gesture, yet it meant more than I could explain. He was not trying to rescue me. He believed I was fully capable of standing on my own. Later that evening, as the crowd gathered near the dessert tables, I walked over to thank him. "You did not have to say any of that," I told him. He smiled gently. "I did not speak for you." "No," I admitted. "You did not." He lifted a glass of sparkling cider before replying. People deserve the chance to tell their own story. Sometimes all they need is for someone to make enough room for their voice to be heard. I looked around the ballroom once more and realized something remarkable had happened without me noticing. I had arrived fearing the opinions of people I had not seen in 10 years. Now I was simply talking with old classmates as the person I had become, no longer hiding from memories, because those memories had finally lost the power to decide who I was. As the evening continued, the reunion committee announced one final surprise before dessert. During the afternoon, they had invited anyone who wished to contribute an anonymous memory about a classmate. Those notes had been collected in a small wooden box, and a few volunteers would read them aloud without revealing who had written them. The idea was simple. Instead of remembering grades or popularity, everyone would remember kindness. The first few notes brought easy laughter. One described a student who always carried extra pencils for classmates during exams. Another thanked someone who quietly paid for school lunches without ever asking for recognition. Then one of the volunteers unfolded another card and paused for a moment before reading. "I never thanked the person who stayed after graduation rehearsal to help Mrs. Donnelly clean the auditorium even though everyone else had already left." That moment reminded me that genuine character is revealed when nobody is watching. My heart stopped for a brief second. It was the same memory Damien had shared with me on the terrace. The volunteer looked around the room. "Does anyone know who this was about?" Before I could react, Mrs. Donnelly herself slowly stood from a nearby table. Retirement had added silver to her hair, but her warm smile remained exactly the same. "I do," she said. "It was Noah." Every conversation faded into silence. She continued with quiet confidence. "I have waited many years for the right moment to say this publicly. Noah was one of the kindest students I ever taught. When rumors spread after graduation, I wanted to defend him, but I convinced myself it was not my place. That remains one of my greatest regrets as an educator." She turned toward me with unmistakable sincerity. "I am sorry." I rose from my chair, not because anyone expected me to, but because she deserved an answer. "You taught me something much more important than any class assignment," I said gently. "You taught me that kindness is never wasted." I carried that lesson with me long after I left Riverside. Please do not let regret erase the good you have done for thousands of students. Her eyes filled with quiet gratitude as the room responded with warm applause. No one was celebrating gossip. They were celebrating truth. Across the ballroom, I noticed Logan standing alone near one of the windows. For the first time all evening, nobody was looking at him for answers. They were listening to people whose voices had never been heard before. After the applause settled, Logan slowly walked toward me. His expression no longer carried the confidence he had worn at the beginning of the reunion. "I owe you more than an apology," he admitted. "I spent years believing that admitting I was wrong would make me weak. Instead, pretending I was right only made me smaller." I listened without interrupting. He took a slow breath before continuing. "I cannot change what happened, but I can stop hiding behind it." I nodded respectfully. "That choice belongs to you." Damien remained quietly in the background, saying nothing. He did not answer for me, and he did not answer for Logan. He simply trusted each of us to speak honestly. Standing in that ballroom, surrounded by classmates who had finally begun to see one another beyond old assumptions, I realized that healing had never required everyone to agree with my past. It only required the truth to be given enough space to stand on its own. The reunion slowly gave way to quieter conversations as the evening drew toward its close. The laughter remained, but it had softened into something warmer, less like people trying to impress one another and more like old friends finally allowing themselves to be genuine. I stepped outside once. Again, grateful for the cool harbor breeze after hours beneath the ballroom lights. The city skyline shimmered across the water, and for the first time in years, Riverside no longer felt like the place I had escaped from. It simply felt like another chapter of my life. A few moments later, I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Damien stopped beside me without saying anything, respecting the silence we had somehow learned to share. "You handled tonight with more grace than most people ever could," he said after a while. I smiled faintly. I spent a long time imagining what I would say if I ever came back here. Funny enough, none of those speeches mattered once I realized I was no longer trying to prove anything. Damien nodded. "That is what impressed me the most." I looked at him curiously. "Not my business. Not the awards." He shook his head. "Those are accomplishments. They are admirable, but they are not the reason I kept looking at you tonight." I waited quietly. I was watching someone who had every reason to become bitter choose kindness instead. His words settled gently in the evening air. "Do not misunderstand me," he continued. "Forgiveness does not erase what happened. It simply means you refuse to let someone else's mistakes become the foundation of your future." I let out a slow breath, realizing how closely his thoughts mirrored the lessons I had learned during the past decade. There were years when I wanted everyone here to regret what they believed, I admitted. But somewhere along the way I became too busy building a life that I actually enjoyed. Revenge slowly stopped feeling important. Damien smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "That is why I admire you." I laughed softly. "You barely know me. I know enough to recognize character when I see it." The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to dismiss his words as simple politeness. After a brief silence, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and handed me a business card. It was elegant and understated, with nothing except his name, direct phone number, and the logo of Carter Development Group. "My company is restoring several historic buildings along the West Coast," he explained. "We are searching for a lead interior designer who values people as much as architecture." I looked at the card before raising my eyes toward him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you an opportunity," he replied calmly. "Whether you accept is entirely your decision." There was no pressure in his tone, no expectation, only respect. That simple difference meant more than he probably realized. "I already have a successful studio," I reminded him with a smile. "I know," he answered. "That is exactly why I am asking instead of assuming." We both laughed quietly. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke again. We simply stood together watching the lights ripple across the harbor until I finally slipped the card carefully into my wallet. "I do not know what happens after tonight," I admitted honestly. Damien looked toward the horizon before answering. "Neither do I. But the best relationships, whether personal or professional, begin with mutual respect instead of expectations." As I looked at the man standing beside me, I realized that what had begun as an evening haunted by old memories had quietly become the beginning of something built on trust, patience, and the rare courage to truly see another person for who they had chosen to become. 1 year later, I found myself standing outside the same Grand Harbor Hotel with a very different feeling in my heart. The banner above the entrance welcomed alumni to the annual community networking dinner, an event that had grown from the success of the previous reunion. This time I did not hesitate before walking inside. I was not returning to confront old memories. I was returning because Riverside had finally become a place where new ones could be created. My design studio had expanded beyond Seattle, partnering with Carter Development Group on several restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Together, we had transformed aging libraries, community centers, and historic buildings into welcoming spaces that reminded people their past could be preserved without preventing their future. The work had challenged me creatively, but what mattered even more was the friendship that had quietly grown. Alongside it, Damien never tried to change my life overnight. He simply showed up, kept every promise he made, respected every boundary I set, and proved that trust is not built through grand declarations, but through countless ordinary moments of consistency. As I entered the ballroom, familiar faces greeted me with genuine warmth. Conversations no longer paused when I approached. Instead, classmates asked about recent projects, shared updates about their families, and laughed about memories that had finally become light enough to enjoy. Mrs. Donnelly embraced me with the same kindness she had always possessed, proudly telling everyone about the literacy center our companies had recently helped renovate. Melissa waved excitedly from across the room, already saving seats for our old group of friends. Even Logan walked over with an easy smile that carried neither regret nor resentment. Over the past year, he had reached out several times, not to rewrite history, but to build a healthier friendship based on honesty. Some relationships are not meant to return to what they once were. Sometimes their greatest purpose is teaching both people how to become better versions of themselves. I respected that, and I believed he did as well. A familiar calm presence appeared beside me just as the evening program began. Damien adjusted his tie before offering the quiet smile that had somehow become my favorite part of every busy day. "You look comfortable here now," he said. I glanced around the ballroom before answering. I finally realized something. "What is that?" I smiled. Home is not the place where nothing painful ever happened. Home is the place where hope eventually becomes stronger than memory. Damien looked at me with the same steady expression that had first caught my attention a year earlier. There was admiration in his eyes, but more importantly, there was partnership. We walked toward our table together as the audience applauded the opening remarks. No one stared in surprise anymore. There was nothing unusual about seeing us side by side. It simply felt right. As the evening came to an end, I looked once more through the ballroom windows at the harbor beyond. The water reflected hundreds of tiny lights, each one shimmering differently, yet belonging to the same horizon. Life, I realized, was much the same. Every difficult experience, every unexpected meeting, every act of courage and forgiveness became part of a larger picture that could only be understood with time. If there is one lesson my journey taught me, it is this. Never allow someone else's misunderstanding to become the final chapter of your story. The people who truly matter will take the time to know your character, not just your reputation. And sometimes, when you stop searching for the person who will rescue you, you discover the one who simply chooses to walk beside you with honesty, respect, and unwavering faith in the person you have become.